back to Withum's video series, The Alternative Route. Here with me today is Dave Rothschild, partner at Cole, Freeman and Mallon, and host of the podcast Tokens of Wisdom, as well as Kyle Grunstra, senior audit manager from Withum's financial services team. Dave and Kyle, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks, Colleen. Happy to be here.
So today we're going to dive into the future of the SEC and what direction you think its focus is going in as it relates to our alternative investment clients. So without any further ado, Dave, what do you think has changed or is going to change in the SEC?
A lot. I think a lot is changing at the SEC from the Gary Gensler era to the era to be led by Paul Atkins when he is confirmed, which has not yet happened. I'll take this in two parts. One is crypto specific and one is sort of writ large. Crypto specific, I like to refer to the Gary Gensler era as the sword of Damocles era for crypto. It kind of felt like at any second, if you're an industry participant, that single hair might sever and send a sword falling directly to your head. It was very difficult to operate in the industry. It felt like enforcement actions were being brought left and right. If a company tried to comply with the law or asked the SEC what the law was, they were just as likely to turn around and bring an enforcement action against them as they were to answer their question. All kinds of roadblocks were put in the way of crypto industry participants, from SAB 121 to proposed rules that limit investment advisors' ability to custody assets. And, we could talk about this for days, but it was the sort of Damocles era. The new SEC so far, like I said before, the new chair hasn't even been confirmed yet, but so far it's looking like the Bette Midler era for crypto. The SEC is going to be the wind beneath crypto's wings instead of the sword that might fall on its head. Enforcement actions are being dropped. New rules are being discussed. Active conversations are happening with industry participants about rules of the road that make sense for the industry. Not everything is a security. So, short term, I think the SEC is looking at the industry with a much more open mind than it was in the Gary Gensler era. And then, on the other side of the coin, writ large to the industry, I think that sort of same ethos is being applied to alternatives by and large, right? We've seen in just the last couple of weeks, there've been a couple sort of relaxations in marketing related rules that the SEC has released. One was they updated an FAQ on the marketing rule to make it easier to basically allow investment advisors to show the gross performance of case studies. And that caused the prior SEC said you had to net out fees and expenses from case study performance reporting, which caused a lot of consternation because kind of how do you do that? It's very difficult to actually do. And then there was also a no action letter that made investor verification for 506C offerings a little bit easier. So I think industry wide, you're seeing the SEC have a lighter hand on alternatives and giving managers and funds more space to operate.
Definitely an exciting shift, I think, for our client base. So, Kyle, what are some of the priorities that you're seeing of the new regime?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. And I think it's important maybe just to take a step back first, right, and think about the SEC overall and what's their mission, right? And it's kind of threefold, I think. So first, kind of protecting investors, right? Also creating efficient capital markets, and then also allowing for capital formation. So kind of what does the SEC view as, potential risks to their mission? And if we look back, I want to say it was October, November last year, they came out with their official priorities for the upcoming year, right? And to Dave's point, there's been a lot of change, but I think the priorities overall, a lot of them will stay consistent. It's just kind of how the SEC will go about addressing these risks and kind of achieving these priorities. So I think to talk about a few of them, a few of the larger ones, cybersecurity is certainly still one on their list of priorities. If we kind of look, say, industry-wide and worldwide, the numbers are still kind of staggering. I think last year alone, it was something in the $5 to $10 trillion range for cybercrime. So that's still, a major one for them. In the U.S., I want to say maybe 500 billion of that. So certainly on the SEC's radar. Cybersecurity industry in general has grown significantly to kind of address this risk as well. So this is certainly one of the priorities and will continue to be one of the priorities. Compliance programs, another important one on their list. And I think that'll continue to be a priority. If you're an investment manager, I think the expectation is, have a solid compliance program in place, and say what you're doing and do what you're saying. Right. I think that's the important thing, especially if the SEC comes in for, say, a routine examination. One of the first things they're going to look at is, okay, let's see your compliance program. Let's see what you have in here. Are you staying up to date on the latest regulations? And are you kind of doing what you're saying in this program? So that'll continue to be on their list of priorities. To switch to a few of kind of the kind of new hot topics, and one Dave addressed already is crypto, also AI. Start with AI. I'd say this is something that these days really every entity and company, whether you're a fund manager, whether you're an operating company, or whether you're a law firm or an accounting firm like us, we're looking at AI. We're trying to see how to kind of how to adopt this in our company to make us better, more efficient going forward. So this is on the SEC's radar because they want to make sure that entities adopting AI are kind of monitoring the use of this, reporting to their investors what they're doing with AI, and just make sure they're safeguarding their clients' information. And then certainly last but not least, crypto, which we have talked about. We'll talk about more in another couple minutes. But crypto is one of the big ones. Crypto markets have grown a ton recently, as we've all seen. We do have a new administration. We do have new leadership, overall, and also in the SEC with Gensler to Atkins now. Like Dave mentioned, there's a new crypto task force that's in place, and they're actually working with industry experts to kind of get a better understanding of crypto in general and not be too quick to the enforcement side of things, but understand it better, get some solid frameworks and guidance out there for people to follow, and kind of collaborate more than just quickly slapping enforcement actions on folks. So I think those are four of the big ones. So cybersecurity, compliance, AI, and crypto.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think, Dave, is there any new legislation on the horizon or that you expect to see as a result of some of these focus areas?
So maybe I think by and large, I'm fairly skeptical about the likelihood of new legislation being passed anytime soon. I think the area where it maybe is most likely to be passed, or where it's most likely to be discussed at least, is in crypto. And I think we've been talking for years about crypto legislation. I think broadly speaking, there are two types of bills that people are talking about and that might be forthcoming. One is a stablecoin bill that would regulate the issuance and the issuers of stablecoins. I think that's probably the most likely of the bills to bear fruit. I think there's broad bipartisan consensus that this is something that would be important, regulate stablecoin issuers. And there have been some bills proposed that hopefully will make some progress with this new Congress. I do think the new Congress is more crypto friendly, or at least crypto open, than the prior Congress. So it's certainly possible that something there will progress. I think what would be more impactful for the industry would be a market structure bill that kind of finally settles the jurisdictional debate between the SEC and the CFTC, and who has jurisdiction over these assets. At what point are they a security? Do they eventually become a commodity? If so, how and when? I think until that time, we're going to continue seeing the sort of, I think the change that we just discussed from the prior SEC to the new one is a good example of like the whipsaw effect of, an administration changes and almost overnight you snap your fingers and it's like a totally different regulatory environment. I think, that might be positive for some of our clients in the short to medium term while this administration is in power, but who knows what happens when the next administration comes along. And I think for markets writ large, stability would be nice. And the way we're going to get stability is by some legislation that kind of finally settles these debates.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to keep up to speed as it continues to change. But Kyle, do you think there's anything in the digital asset space specifically that's going to be impacted by these focus areas? I know Dave touched on some of them, but any others that you kind of are expecting to see?
Yeah, we hit on a lot of them. But yeah, I think just to kind of echo again what we've been talking about, there's a lot of tailwind now with the new administration, new leadership at the SEC, and just kind of to look back at what's happened the past handful of months. Even it's the president's come out and said we're establishing a crypto reserve. We want U.S. to be the crypto capital of the world. There's a new crypto task force that's been put into place to kind of work on getting a solid framework out there. Enforcement cases have been dropped, as Dave alluded to, for some of the big players like Coinbase and Ripple and Kraken, which initially were enforcements just for potentially having unregistered exchanges, but then where's the guidance to say what's a security and what's not? So things like that. Also, the repeal of SAB 121, that was a big one for custody. What else am I missing here? The Genius Act, which Dave alluded to, which is providing some guidance for stable coins in general. That'll be huge for the industry. We'll bring in some kind of larger and more institutional players. And I think even just last week, I heard something about the FDIC coming out with some clarification around some prior guidance that came out that required a bank to notify the FDIC and also get approval before engaging in crypto activities. So with that going away, a lot of tailwind in general for the crypto industry.
Certainly exciting for us and I think our client base. So we'll continue to see what happens here. Thank you both for joining me today, and stay tuned for our next episode of The Alternative Route.